Hello and welcome to another episode of Beyond Data Management Podcast, powered and brought to you each week by HS GovTech. I'm your host, Cameron Garrison. Thanks for joining us again today. Have a fun conversation. We'll get right to it. We're going to be joined here for the next bit by Ashley Miller, Senior Program Coordinator, and does a lot, wears many hats actually there, currently with NEHA. That's just the current latest stop on the road. And actually, I've had several people say, you really need to have Ashley on and talk to her. In fact, Shirag from our organization after NEHA was pressing on that button very hard. And so happy to have Ashley Miller join us from... is it the back? I forget. You're in the western part of Colorado. Is that the Front Range or no? The Front Range is the other side. You're in the near Grand Junction.
I'm on the West Slope, Best Slope.
West Slope, but it gets much rockier and a lot more beautiful the further you go, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. When I first moved to Colorado, there was talk about, dividing the state into two. So I'm on the West Slope. I'm proud of it.
And, it's interesting when I've done a lot of work in the state and with like the State Department of Health. And the thing that's really interesting, a lot of people don't realize, is during the winter, when it gets really bad, there's not a lot of routes to actually get over the Rockies there and to the other side of the state, is there? In fact, it's pretty limited if you get really socked in with a blizzard.
Yeah, absolutely. Even during fire season, some of the routes through I-70 and the mountain passes will close. About a year ago, we had on US 50, one of the bridges was deemed unsafe. And so they closed that for months. And so the only way was through I-70 and the Rockies. So it definitely is an interesting world out here, and thinking of like our business operators and where they're getting their food from and just everything, right? Our retailers out this way, it creates for a unique environment out this way.
So you're not from there originally. Do you ski? Or...
No, I'm a Florida girl through and through. I snowshoe, but no, I don't ski. I had an 8th grade trip up in North Carolina where they were like making snow on the mountains, and that was my first and only experience to skiing. And I just feel like at this point, I don't feel like I need to tear an ACL or do anything like that. So I snowshoe though.
I know the feeling. I don't trust myself at all in that scenario. And so we're sitting in Charlotte. And so I know probably where you were, and now people where you are now would laugh and say, yeah, that's not skiing on the little hills that we have here. So actually, so you mentioned it, you're from Florida, so that's a big change. So maybe walk through early what brought you there. You have had one of the things that's so interesting, and you're going to be talking about some things today that you've done in your career that are actually no one that's been on before has spoken to or done firsthand. And it's also an interesting mix of industry, working for the industry side versus working with regulators. So let's go all the way back and kind of tell your story and how you got into environmental health. I think you might actually be a little different than a lot of the folks too, in that you may have come to it and realized it's something you really wanted to do as a passion a little earlier than a lot of people, not as accidental or later in life discovery. So talk to us about how you got there and what attracted you to the field, and then we'll talk a bit about the various stops and experiences you've had along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. My mom and my family are still down there. And of course, in high school, I don't think I ever knew what this was and anything like that, but I love science. And so, I got accepted to the University of Florida in Gainesville. Go Gators, totally. Gator Nation is everywhere, right? I love, I'm very much a proud alumni. And I went and started at pre-pharmacy. And I remember like the first couple weeks of school, I was at the pre-pharmacy club meeting, and everyone's talking about taking the standardized testing and doing all this stuff in 2 years. And I'm looking around the room like, wait a second, I'm at the University of Florida. Like, I'm at like the #1 party school. Like, is this really what my college, career is going to be like? So I went and I talked to my advisor, and I just, laid it all out of like, this is what I would love to do. This is my passion. These are the skills that I have. I love science, all that stuff. And she said, have you ever thought about food science? And I said, well, I don't know. My mom has her degree in home ec. She was a middle school librarian. And my sister at the time was working for Disney in food and beverage. And I just was like, well, not really, but what is it? And so she said, it's an awesome, science-based curriculum. And when you graduate over 4 years, you'll have all the prerequisites that you need if you want to go into pharmacy school, med school, all that kind of good stuff. So I said, all right, sign me up. So of course you had to take all the general chemistries and the microbios and all that. But my first class was government regulations. And I don't know if it was the professor or the guest lectures that he had brought in, but I was sold. I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to be a regulator. And so I just tried to do as much as I could and really was going down the regulatory path, and had worked in some chemistry labs and things like that, and just realized, like, the fun part of food science and food safety, people do a lot of the flavor development and the R&D, and I'm like, nope, I like to read a book, I like to read a code, and I like to figure these things out. So when it came time to figure out my next steps and go to graduate school, I was applying to the University of Maryland because the FDA, right, has like offices, they do a ton of research there, they're really close partners. I was so excited, but didn't get in. So then it was like, all right, plan B, what do I do? And so I was talking to my best friend at the time, and she was going into nursing school, and she's like, have you heard of public health? I'm like, kinda, not really. She's like, I think that would be something that's kind of pretty close. So I did my research and realized that a lot of regulators have their master's in public health. So I went down to Tampa to the University of South Florida to get my master's in public health. I think at the time, the program is really focused on like a lot of zoonosis, that, vector-borne diseases, mosquitoes. Obviously, it's Florida, right? So I did a lot of work in that. But in between then, right, I snagged an internship with Burger King. And so I got to work out of the Miami headquarters and doing some regulation, like government, and kind of like helping them bring their health department inspection monitoring tool on board with all the franchisees and the corporate stores. And that was my first taste of like, ooh, this is fun, right? Like, this is exciting. There's a lot of different inside scoop that you always feel like you have, right? And maybe I'm just nosy. That's why I like to be a regulator.
Yeah. But no, you're right. There is a voyeuristic quality to it, isn't there? Like you know something that other people don't, and that they might want to know. I also am super curious. Well, not really curious about this, but I eat way too much fast food. How are the discounts or the eating for free when you're from Burger King corporate?
So what was really a cool experience is that they have their test kitchen, right? And so like their test kitchen is in their cafeteria, or at least it was.
Oh, cool.
And so whenever they were doing any kind of new products or rollouts, you could go and be like a quality tester. So like how many lunches I ate, just like quality testing the new Whopper that they were launching. Yeah, it was pretty shameless.
Oh, that's actually pretty awesome. And did you get to experience in there some things maybe that never made it to the menu? Like how much is, sorry, we're way far afield, but like how much experimenting does happen from a test kitchen perspective? In other words, they're working on things that never see the light of day that might surprise people.
Yeah, I mean, again, my role was more focused on like the regulatory piece, but I will say there's probably more of it doesn't go to market than does. I think we were doing as a part of an internship, you got to kind of work everywhere, right? But I was doing a lot of temperature monitoring for a jalapeno cheddar stuffed Whopper. I think that might have been launched at some point, but it was really just, all the data validation that it would come out cooked, right, once it went through the flame broiler and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of time just taking temperatures and all these different types of patties. And I think one of the other things that really that role showed me is from a supply chain and the quality assurance that goes into the supply chain, like just the buns and the number of suppliers that make the buns, and the specifications for how high a bun should be, or what is the color of the bun, what's the texture of the bun. From the beef, it was incredible to see like the suppliers all come in office and
it's
work.
complicated.
And so yeah.
and those Burger King, all those big chains, they're so big and probably so valuable to a bun supplier. I would imagine that if Burger King was complaining about just a shade of color they wanted changed, those suppliers probably move heaven and earth to try to make it that color, wouldn't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
And,
Absolutely. It's big money.
and you mentioned temping it and things. How much? I promise. I don't think either of us plan to talk about test
That's
kitchens,
okay.
but what's the regulatory involvement? I wonder that because you talked about you had to temp and make sure they'll cook in the broiler and the equipment that's in the restaurant. How much did they have to bring in that side of things to make sure that the rollout wasn't just delicious, high calories, high sodium, high cholesterol, but also like wouldn't make people sick and could adhere to standards?
Yeah, and that's where I think one of the advantages of the corporate restaurants and stuff is that they have those SMEs in-house, right? And so my manager, Mary Sanford, who had been with Burger King for 30 plus years, right? She was kind of the regulatory expert. So she knew one internally what the parameters would be from Burger King, but then also food code and kind of making sure that piece is. I think there's also once things go out to market, it's a key piece for the industry to really make sure that the regulators know what they're seeing, right? Especially when you're launching new equipment. Maybe a new burger patty is a little different because it's at the end of the day, they've already, Burger King, that's what they do, right? They grill burgers. But if they were launching a new piece of equipment that had to change the way the operations worked or how cleaning was, I think that's where you really want to partner. I didn't get to see that much on that side of the fence, but later when we talk about my Amazon role in which I was launching some grocery stores, that was really key, is making sure that we worked very closely with the regulators in their markets and that they were comfortable with what we were doing.
And I think, and even for people who've maybe been in the a few years, they're in an agency, they're an inspector, there's a lot that goes into the full cycle of this, including with industry, that I think a lot of people it's still not even necessarily fully understood across the board as much as it could be. I think places like CFP and there are bodies and groups that are playing a role in bringing that together and helping them collaborate, but more of it would be good. So before we went down the have it your way, the Burger King, that was totally just indulgent on my part because I know that like that's sad. The first thing that I would think about as a plus for going to work at Burger King corporate is, oh, maybe I can get some free Whoppers and sneak peeks of things. But so I'm curious, you said that you had a lecturer come into a class and you knew I want to be a regulator. That's very specific, and again, regulator is not something that is glamorized very often. I'm just curious, what did he say? Like, what captured you in that moment? Because you seem to have that as one of those light bulb moments that you remember. It's when you kind of really got captured.
Yeah. And I mean, it's kind of the old age adage, right? Like of not really remember what they said, but how they made you feel.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe he was a part of like the U.S. Public Health Service. So he came in with his uniform, right? Which is always like, ooh, you're important. You're in a uniform. Right?
Yeah.
And just, I think there was a lot of international talk, right? And so a lot of just like that it's beyond just here, right? And I think that was the light bulb, is that everybody does eat, right? All over the world. And so the impact that you can have, right? And maybe that's a little selfish to think like, oh, I could really make a change. But I do feel like when you're in college and you're looking to do that, right? Especially when you're in kind of like the health field, that's ultimately why you're going in, is to help people, right? And so I just remember him talking a ton about like the international travel that he was doing, the different inspections. And I think there was just this curiosity of like, how is food made? What does this look like? Like, and then also to have that responsibility of, I can, as a public health like practitioner, like I can save more lives than a doctor does every day, right? And that's kind of this mantra that I've kind of carried through my career, is like, if I could get one person to wash their hands, I won. Like I had a win today, and that
really
one
true.
act, right, could save and prevent a lot of illnesses and lives, right? And that's what I always thought. So I think it was just a combination of everybody, really in that program. It just felt right, and just.
I get it. I don't think it's selfish at all. Like it is the one thing that is universal to all humans, all cultures, all experiences. We eat. And with modern society, the amount of time we eat what we didn't prepare is just skyrocketed. I think it's also the only thing in even a standard health department that universally touches everyone. Not everybody swims, not everybody has children in daycare, not everybody has a septic tank, right? I think a lot of these things are elective participation or not universal, but not the food program. Like that,
Right.
it's literally you die if you don't eat. And so it's intimate, it's close to people. I totally get it. So Burger King, I think was your master's before or after Burger King?
It was my master's was after I did my internship, they kind of hired me on part time to continue. So I was doing my master's, working part time with Burger King, and then also that's when I got my feet wet and started at Taco Bell. So I was working at a local Taco Bell. I started on the line, and then worked myself way up to like a shift manager. So I worked there to kind of pay my bills for school.
How long? Respect. Like it's not enough people do that anymore, right? Like just take out the loan, take out a little extra in the student debt just to cover living expenses. No, you cover that at Taco Bell. That's, again, if you're out there, you're young. By definition, I'm dating, making myself seem really old, but like that's the right way to do it. Like it keeps the debt down. That's smart.
Yeah.
Probably though, is it in hindsight not not the most exciting or job you love the most, or did it add anything to your experience for what you ultimately specialized in? Does it help you? Did it help you relate as a regulator to have actually worked the front line and run an actual restaurant?
Absolutely. I mean, without a doubt, like if you don't know how to either put yourself in those people's shoes or actually gotten to live the experience, right? I think that's something that makes you a better regulator. But yeah, I think that role was fun because there wasn't a ton of responsibility, right? I would work the night shifts. That was also, I probably don't eat at a lot of fast food once the dining room closes. But yeah, so it was just a lot of fun and just a lot of different characters that you get to work with. And you get to realize too, like, this isn't it. Like, these are people's livelihoods, right? Like, this is, people are raising families on these salaries. People are raising families on these jobs. And so to treat them with respect too, that they're not just a fast food worker, right? Most of the people that I worked with were adults. There were a couple of us college kids, right? But I'd say most of like the full timers that were in the restaurant were adults, and this was the career, and it is a very rewarding career. So
yeah,
but
no,
yeah,
for sure.
I think the coming home and peeling off like your uniform after 10 hours and the smell and just like,
So it sticks on you, right? I know, like if you work in a McDonald's or places with those deep fryers, yeah, you smell like it. What do you smell like after Taco Bell, or is that not for a general family rated show?
Yeah. But I will say Taco Bell does fry too, so there was a lot of that in the air.
Yeah, for sure. And so then you get your master's, and you stayed in industry for a bit after that. I know the one I'm dying to talk about. If you had to stop in between, we can go there first. But early on, you ended up moving and taking a job working in a dairy program, correct?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess I think, when you look back at it, even though I wanted to be a regulator, I don't think I had any kind of clue on how you become a regulator, right? And so I jumped into industry. That's where the money was. That's where the jobs were. So that's where I went. So I went into Houston. I moved from Florida to Houston, and I started working with the HEB milk plant. That was the first time I really had a team under me. So I was the quality assurance manager. Had no idea what milk was, right? Other than it's like the most regulated product. And so had a team about 10 to 12 quality assurance technicians under me. And then I had the training program as well.
That's a big team.
Yeah. A lot of, and it was a 365, 24 hours. So it was morning shifts, night shifts, rotating shifts that the team had. So it was a lot.
So we've talked to people before who, from a regulator side, have responsibility for the dairy program, but never somebody on the industry side. First of all, I have a lot of questions on it. First of all, a team of 12 at a supermarket chain, which HEB, for folks that are watching that are not from a region that has one, they're really nice. In fact, I was in Texas a couple weeks ago and was in an HEB store. I was like, wow. It's not typical, is it, for supermarket chains to have their own full cycle and milk processing like that, or am I just ignorant?
I think the big ones probably do. Like I know Publix does. That was one of the things we got to tour the Publix plant back in college. And I think Kroger, like I think the bigger ones do, right? And because the profit margins, right? It kind of makes sense to keep it all in house. And so to have that manufacturing division, right, versus having to always get everything bought and supplied in. So I think there are some core commodities that most big national grocery store chains will probably produce
Interesting.
under the same roof.
So with a team of 12 and knowing that businesses do not typically just keep teams kicking around with minimal things to do, that must have been a pretty intense job. What did that job entail? What was that role, and what all were you responsible for? And what do you do to keep a big milk plant running like that safely?
Yeah, it takes a lot. It really does. And I was so new to the world, right? And of course, when you're there, you're going to conquer it all and you're going to take it all on. So from a quality assurance standpoint, it was just really being both in the lab. So with dairy, right, there's a ton of internal testing that you do on every batch, every raw milk batch that comes in. You're testing for antibiotics. You're testing for your butter fat. Milk is sold and bought by Butterfat. And so in the lab, right, you have all these different analyzers that will look at what it is on the raw side. And, there's a lot of money that passes through based on that. And so that was one of my big roles, is to make sure that that analyzer was calibrated right, because if it wasn't, money started going wonky. And so that was a big part of it. And then a lot of the internal testing. So you test for different coliform and quality assurance type of parameters. And so that's on like every single run. So you have technicians that are on the floor, right? Coaching operations, making sure labels are right, cap colors, sanitation's happening correctly. And then you have the other technicians that are inside the lab that are receiving products from the field or from the floor and testing and doing all the quality assurance parameters. So wow. It was keeping all of that afloat. And then, like I said, also the training program. So HEB, I think from a culture standpoint, they were probably one of the best, right? I mean, I can even right now, it's people, quality, service, and cost, right? That's what they had you focus on. And number one was people. And so they put a lot of effort both on customers and internal employees. So
what, did you all have your own lab, or did you send it out to a, wow. So you also had a full lab at your disposal.
Yeah. So we had a full lab. It was big. My office was in the lab because that's where a lot of the magic happens. And then from a regulatory perspective, we had our state inspector. He would come in every month. And so he was an interesting character. He used to write scripts for like science fiction shows and all that kind of stuff. So he was
okay, this is a character, isn't it? Yeah. Did he ever get any of them produced or anything? Or just a hobby?
I think he just kept submitting them.
And the fact that you know that means that he was also one of those guys who talked about it a lot, wasn't he?
Yeah. But quite honestly, like I learned a lot from him. And I also, culture in manufacturing is very different. I think culture everywhere, right? We talk about food safety culture. And I will say, I learned very early on that my regulator was typically like a tool in the back of my pocket, right? And so there were times where I'm like, okay, I'm struggling to get this done, or the plant to like care about this. So on our walk, I'm going to make sure you see this, right? And so that was kind of a strategy or a
free consulting, right?
Yeah, and if he wrote it on his report, then it got fixed, right? So
oh, clever. So actually, that's interesting. So when you're in industry, there are times where, because your whole mission is safety and making sure things are done properly in the interest of safety. So there's times you can use the regulator. There's times you want it written up, because it gives you the leverage that you need to make it a priority?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when, I think there's, you talk about resources and funding and money and things like that, right? And so there's reasons why businesses make decisions that they do. But yeah, I think throughout my career, my regulator, it was always someone that I used strategically.
And would you encourage, beyond obviously just dairy, is that something that you would encourage people in industry to take to heart and actually do, is to make them an ally, give them the ability to help inform you, like bring them in a little more instead of keeping them secretively at arm's length? Is that generally the right advice?
Oh, yeah, I think so. And I think a lot of it, though, is the relationship that you have with your regulators, right? And again, I think, I had a really good relationship with him and I knew that there was not going to be anything punitive. And I think at the end of the day, like one of the pieces that I try and live to is do the right thing. And as long as what I was doing, I felt like was going to help and, protect public health and was going to make things better, right? And was risk based, then yeah, totally. But I do think that sometimes you don't get to have that relationship with your regulator. But I would say for industry, regardless of whether or not you're on manufacturing or the retail side, to really be strategic with those relationships. Even as a trainer, resources, all that kind of stuff. They're the ones that are there. And even just to pick their brains, like, what's on top of your mind, right? Like, what are things that you're seeing? And then I know, okay, this inspector really cares about X, Y, and Z. I'm going to make sure that I'm always fixing it and it's always going to be right in my facility because that's what they work on.
It makes sense to, I think it's human nature, but when someone seems secretive, I think that we're hardwired to be more skeptical of that person. So it
Yeah.
actually makes sense that if you have that kind of collaboration with the regulator, you actually take away reasons for them to be like, I need to kick the tires extra hard here. What are they hiding? Like, right? Because you're building
Yeah.
trust, I guess, at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And especially being young and new, like I was in that role, I needed mentorship and I needed someone to kind of help train me. And that's what they did, right? And they were willing to do that and take me under their wing. And I think one of the other pieces too is I was so proud of our like internal, we would do like listeria monitoring. I was so proud. I'm like, we haven't found anything. And then, he was like, you're just not looking hard enough. And I'm like, probably. And so that revolution, right? That one line, that one comment, right, made me go and dig deep and redo our program and update where we were
Wow.
swabbing and how we were swabbing and the locations
Did your
and just the
current
frequencies.
Was he right? Did your occurrence rate tick up a little when you start looking harder?
I would say it changed, like the locations that we were finding it, right? You think about crates coming in from the store. So milk crates, dairy crates, right? It goes out in a crate, it comes in a crate, you have a crate washer, so we were starting to like look at different places like that. And we would see it in those places. Obviously, as in a ready to eat product, you're never swabbing a zone 1, so a direct food contact surface, but you swab all over it and around it, right? And you take your precautions there. But I would say our sanitation team was really, really good. And the couple times that we found it, it was nowhere, right? It was in those crate washing areas in the warehouses that were further out, but the likelihood that it could be tracked in, right? You never know. So it was a good experience for me, surely, just based on that one comment he said.
And
So
again, something that a lot of people just don't have any familiarity with, in the milk part of that specifically. That took you to Texas. You actually said something that actually got talked about in a keynote at NEHA this past year in Phoenix, which you mentioned food safety culture. You said it's said a lot. It's kind of a catchphrase, buzzword, if you will. What is it? What, like, from your perspective, and how do you take that from more than just a shibboleth or a buzzword to have it actually mean something that moves the ball forward for public health?
yeah, I think from an industry perspective, right? I think food safety culture is there's no fear around doing the right thing, right? There's no repercussions for taking a little bit more time to do the right thing. There's no fear about reporting what you're seeing or how you're seeing it done, or even like coaching cross, right, like to your partner, coaching upwards. And I think once that is kind of gone, um, then I think process and it's gone in a lot of different ways. But I think once that is lessened, right, there's none of that fear there that I'm going to get in trouble for this. I think that's what food safety culture is to me, is that you really, and I have made a ton of mistakes, but like I said, as long as I felt like I was doing the right thing, I could justify the extra time it took, the extra supplies it was, the money it was, right? Or maybe we didn't get to meet our drive-through timer today at lunch rush, but you know what? Like the team was washing their hands. We were, making sure things were cooked appropriately. We were keeping up our quality parameters from a fast food chain. And so I think like some of those pieces, once that's gone, I think that's food safety culture. And there's a lot of ways to do that, right? And processes and procedures and hiring the right people. But I really think it's just empowering people to do the right thing, but then also like allowing them to do the right thing and encouraging them to do the right thing. So,
which is by definition, everything you just described is culture, right? So actually you focused on the culture part of it, which makes so much sense. So after HEB, you're still not to the government side regulator yet. You took a couple of additional stops after that. Tell us about those, because those were also really interesting and with names that I think everybody would, instantly recognize.
Yeah, so I think I was ready to get out of the manufacturing 24/7, 2 a.m. calls situation. So I started looking for corporate food safety roles.
Okay, so sorry, hold that thought. What, I just have to ask, because I know, again, I sometimes will just I'm just listening. Like the only difference is I'm sitting in a much more sterile environment. I would normally listen to something like this probably in my reclining massage chair. But if I'm listening to what you just said, I think my first question is, what type of a call do you get at 2:00 in the morning? Because that's no good quality of life. You wouldn't imagine that that's part of a job like that. So what drives that? What's an example of you having to get up in the middle of the night?
Yeah, it's kind of what call don't you get at 2 a.m., right? I think dairy, I think one of its busier time is at night, is when all the truckers are coming in, all the large tankers, and you're offloading the raw milk. And so again, as a part of the lab, we did a lot of testing on the raw milk before it even came into the plant. And so if one of those pieces of equipment went down, guess who had to come in and try and calibrate it and fix it? And the technicians knew, right? But there was definitely, some of those were our critical control points. And so we wanted to make sure that they were right. Then there is, the pasteurization machine would go down, sanitation had an issue, things like that. I mean, it really, it spanned a lot. So there was a lot of good learnings. But I feel like at 2 a.m. there was like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, that's not a job you do for 20 years. That's for sure. That's a grind.
There's some people that do. And I love that about them. And they live and breathe dairy, right? But, yeah, it's definitely, it wasn't something I could have done for 20 years. No.
So you left the milk world, and I believe you moved again, right? And
well, I stayed in Houston. I stayed in Houston for a little while, and I went and worked with Cisco, the Cisco distribution company, and so really got my first eye at kind of the middle part, right? So manufacturing, and now we're in the broadline distribution centers. And I was working there with doing their recalls and regulatory. So again, regulatory has always been my piece. And that was intense to execute recalls. That's another job that was middle of the night when you were on call and things like that. Your weekends were typically gone. Frozen strawberries will always be my main of existence. I left that role before the romaine lettuce outbreaks, but yeah, frozen strawberries was kind of the one I hung my hat on.
And recalls are generally, that's an interesting, almost probably its own show topic in and of itself, but there's a lot of gray area, like the decision to do certain recalls and things. Like there's a whole thing there, right? And to a degree, a gray area, not necessarily in all cases a very defined, that's check, that's a recall. How much of that is judgment call? And we don't have to spend a lot of time on it, but that's a whole thing, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's, again, where you'll see really critical relationships with your regulatory community. So again, a lot of Cisco branded products weren't recalled. What we also did was any product Cisco sold, right? So it was all of that. So a lot of the stuff I didn't get to see that part. I just helped kind of go through the supply chain. But the frozen strawberries were a Cisco branded product. And I think that was one thing that I've been really lucky in my career is I've had people just bring me into conversations. And so the VP of quality assurance at Cisco at the time, he would just let me sit and listen in on the calls that he was having with the FDA, and there was a lot of back and forth, right? There was a lot of like decision making that they were doing together, risk-based decision making. I feel like The FDA never came in with a heavy hand. They wanted to see the data, hear the data, what was going on, what information we needed to present to them, and they listened. Right. We even got opportunities to look at some of the public announcements that went out. I mean, granted, we probably couldn't change language, but at least we had, like, the FDA was helping us, right?
You didn't get blindsided.
Exactly.
And I think you also highlighted probably what I meant when I said some gray area in talking to other folks from both sides of the fence on that. There's also, to a degree, some negotiation that goes, I mean, it is based on science and fact. I'm not implying it's not, but there's scenarios, right, where the company may see it one way, FDA might see it slightly differently, and you, for lack of a better word, there's some negotiating, isn't there?
Especially when I think it comes down to what and how much to recall.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's where I'm excited to continue to see the growth of the traceability ruling and all the new technology that's coming in, because when I was there, I mean, what we would get from some of these suppliers is just recall the whole month's worth, because we don't know when the problem happened. Like, we can't tell you a lot code, right? Or like even 3 days worth. And so when you think about food waste, right, and what that is, that's definitely, I think, an advantage of the new technology that's coming out, to where you really can get to lot code traceability.
Yeah, farm to fork fixes a lot of that, doesn't it?
Yeah, but there was a lot of just like bucketing, and I think that's where a lot of the negotiations comes from. Is like, okay, we recognize there's a problem. We're not debating there's a problem, right? But it's how much do we really need to pull back and bring out a market? And, you think about service implications to the downstream retailers and all of that kind of stuff, right? So there's definitely a lot of ripple effects, but I think that was really where a lot of the negotiations happened.
And again, not to overly nerd out on recalls, but I believe there's cost associated with it. But most of those large manufacturers and distributors have insurance for this, don't they? So we're talking also definitely not a regulator that the risk people would take it from there, but the cost is also borne in different ways, including by insurance, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I know at the time, recall insurance was something that people had talked about. And I'm sure that, like you said, a lot of the bigger suppliers do have it, because there were recalls that were millions of dollars just from a Cisco standpoint, right? Well, what we charged back to the supplier. Never mind what, a lot of these suppliers don't only sell to Cisco, right? They sell to a ton of different food distributors. So if ours was a few $1,000,000, US Foods, I'm sure, was on the same, bucket, and Gordon's Food Service and all that kind of stuff, right? So yeah, it can become very costly. And I think that's why how much to pull back gets really complicated, because you're just trying to, one, obviously protect public health, but then also from a business standpoint, make sure it makes sense.
Not burn money. So how long did you do that there with Cisco? Also a uniquely challenging, at times stressful type of role. How long did you do that?
Yes, I did that for about 1.5 years. That's where I met Shirag, actually. He was my manager there at the end. So I hung out for about 1.5 years. And I actually, that role, as I was leaving, again, my VP was, I kind of was like, man, I just feel like I couldn't make enough change. Things weren't happening fast enough. And he's like, actually, the size of Cisco, it doesn't shift. You can't move this boat overnight, And so, again, that was a good advice that I think I was like, oh, yeah, maybe, right? Again, you're young, you want to see change, you want to make that impact, you feel like you're doing good. But I think that was something, and there was a ton of different roles and responsibilities with that piece too, because FSMA was just coming out for distributors, and so we were changing the game and how we were going to implement all that. And but yeah, so that was a fun role for sure.
Yeah, and then I think NRA, right?
Yeah, so then I moved. So then that's when I realized, retail.
The Restaurant Association, not the gun people.
Yeah. Yeah, so the National Restaurant Association. So at Cisco, that's when I really came to be of like, retail and restaurants and stuff, that's where they probably need the most help, right? A lot of them don't have these corporate people like me who have a degree in it and, experience in it. So that's when I went to the National Restaurant Association up in Chicago. So I moved downtown Chicago, sold my car. We were working on the 33rd floor of the Willis Tower. It was awesome. Wow. And the people there were so creative and so much fun. And at the time, my role was to start really building. They were kind of going into wanting to be more than just serve safe, right? More than just we sell your food handler and your food manager exams, and really become like SMEs in the food safety world and your one-stop shop. So they began kind of segmenting, and they called it food safety focus. And so really that was my first chance of really just like creating things that I thought were important, obviously within a strategy of the team. But one of my first things I got to write was like a guidance document to help restaurants on supply chain, right? Again, coming out of Cisco, that I felt like was a really cool tie, that I could actually say, like, here's how I would build out my supplier approval program if I was a restaurant. And when you say supplier approval program, that's like way different to a restaurant than it is to a manufacturer. And so that was an awesome opportunity. Got to do a ton of travel there, spoke at a lot of different conferences, and really just raising awareness that like these things that manufacturers are dealing with are the same things that the restaurants are dealing with as well. And so how can we kind of learn from each other and make it make sense?
It's a really broad, and again, unique. It's a resume that not many people have in a lot of very different disciplines, which I guess at this point, were you kind of facing a fork in the road at that opportunity? Were you considering staying with industry? Because you went to Amazon too. So actually, I've just lost myself in the timeline. Did you do that before you went into regulation?
No.
We're not even done yet. That's right. So I kind of gave away part of it, which we'll get to. But like, were you thinking industry forever at that point? What brought you to regulation? Because I think the next stop is getting west and actually doing the environmental health work. What drove you deciding to go do that at that point in your career? And then tell us about that, where you went from an EH perspective.
Yeah, definitely. I think so there's probably two pieces to it. I was finally at a point in my career where I felt like people were asking me for advice, right? And looking and seeking my opinion on things. But I also felt like what we talked about at Taco Bell, I didn't really have like the firsthand experience. And that coupled with my coworker, he was a former environmental health director as well as a public health director. And so he and I, he would share stories about his career. And I just was like, ugh, I haven't done that yet. And also I was getting to a point in my career where like, okay, Ashley, like the more you keep job hopping, like at what point are you going to be able to explain this, right? I do think that stigma is kind of gone. I would say that like that shouldn't be something that people worry about as long as you can tell your story, right? But it was something I was thinking about is like, okay, I've spent like 2 years basically at each gig, right? Like how many times am I going to continue to do this? So I finally was like, all right, I think it's time to go into the regulatory world. I think it's just, you know what, I've seen things that I've wanted to see, and I feel like I've accomplished what I want to accomplish. Time to do it. So my very best friend, she had moved out to Colorado and she was in Denver. And so I started applying. I said, you know what, if I'm going to move across the country again, let me see how close I get to you. So I started applying at the Denver City Department of Public Health. And then I was also applying to some random place called Grand Junction, middle of nowhere, public health. I was interviewing with both, and Grand Junction offered me the job first. And so I took it. I moved to Grand Junction in spring of 2019. I had never even seen the place. I used an errand runner to like find me an apartment and do all that kind of stuff. So I interviewed remotely, all that kind of good jazz. Wow. I will say I took a job in the middle of nowhere, leaving Chicago, right? And I actually was making less money than I did my first job out of college. But I was like, I want to do this. I've always wanted to do this. I need to do this.
Wow. Yeah, you definitely really want to do it if you're going to go back that many jobs to be able to say the last time you were at that pay rate. It is public service, isn't it? That it's not going to get you rich.
No, not at all. Not at all. But you get rich in other ways. Let's say it that way, right?
Yeah. What was the culture side? So you went from, and I've been to Grand Junction, not a huge place. So you go from the city lifestyle where you don't have a car, you're working in a skyscraper. That's a big adjustment, right? To then be in Grand Junction, Colorado, working in a health department, which is certainly not a skyscraper.
Yeah, yeah. It was, but it wasn't scary, right? I think again, like when you kind of have this North Star, and as cheesy as that sounds, right? Like again, I just knew I wanted to do this, and at the time in Chicago, I started bike camping, so I would put all my gear on a bike, take the metro as far as I could get, ride like another 20 miles to a state park, and camp by myself. So I think like I was realizing city life wasn't for me anyways. And so then, coming to Colorado just seemed like a good fit. The adjustment factor was real. But I think again, it's one of the things that even as a regulator, like every place you go to, every restaurant, every grocery store, like you have to go in with an open mind. And if you don't, right, then you're only going to do a disservice to yourself and to your community. And so I think that's just the approach I took, was like, okay, if I don't like it, I can just leave again in a couple of years, right? I've already done it like 3 different times. So what's the worst that can happen?
Yeah, you're a veteran at that point. What was the
Yeah.
role you initially accepted when you got your first foray into the government side?
It was just an environmental health specialist. So I was
You were
boots on the
inspecting.
ground, do your 25 to 30 inspections a month. Yeah.
You were
So
very clearly, like, you knew the gig, the gig, and a
mhm.
lot about it from your previous roles in industry. But did you find when you actually hit the pavement doing inspections that there were some things you're like, oh wow, I had a misconception of this or that, and what were maybe the biggest misconceptions that you learned? How did it enhance your already really kind of rich experience when you
Yeah.
faced that for the first time in those shoes?
I don't think I ever realized how much responsibility a regulator really has on their shoulders.
Hmm.
You can really be the person that makes or breaks a business, that makes or breaks a relationship, that makes or breaks, like, one thing especially in a small community with a very pro-business approach, which I appreciated, but, we were definitely in some ways our hands tied a little bit, but so you really had to navigate these relationships very smartly and strategically again, right? Just on the other side. But I will say one true misconception I had was just how much responsibility it is on going in there and making sure you do your best job every single inspection, and making sure that you get, because you never know, that operator could be 2 days away from closing and here you come, right? And so I think there was just a lot, or that operator could be doing something so grossly wrong, and here you come to help fix it, right? And so from a public perspective, going back to that, I have lives to save. Like if I can do this and I can save lives, and I really wore that on my shoulders, and that gets hard to carry for sure. It gets a lot. It gets heavy.
It
So
is heavy, and you're right about the responsibility. And I think even inspectors, if they haven't had this happen to them yet, don't fully always recognize some of the responsibility. I think is a little bit hidden. But for example, if you are the inspector of record for a facility and something really bad happens and they're in the news, maybe there's litigation and law and things
yeah.
afterwards, your reports are going to get scrutinized, picked over by lawyers. You probably will get deposed. Like, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it is a lot of
Yeah.
responsibility, including a lawyer looking to make you the scapegoat because you didn't say anything and you inspected it 5 times leading up to, when something bad happened. It's a lot to carry, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And especially, I think about these new, in a small community, one of the things that was a big challenge at the health department was recruitment, right? And so I think I was someone that was very unique into Grand Junction, is that I had a lot of experience. Well, in Grand Junction, who has a lot of food experience? So usually you're recruiting out of like, your favorite restaurant or a really good manager or something like that. But I think to put that on someone who doesn't understand that, or who has not had a ton of training, and it's just, a lot of times you just got to get your numbers. And so, there are a lot of training programs and, a lot of roles and responsibilities in the health department before you can get fully like out in the field. But I still think yeah, it's a lot. It's a
It
lot.
is. And you came in a very interesting time, although you had no way to know it at the beginning, but 2019 you get there, and that fall, I believe it was, because I was working with the state at that time, I believe it was the fall of 2019, they started a statewide data and system transformation, which would have, which I know affected you too at Mesa County, because you were involved. And then, of course, in less than a year after you got there, the pandemic strikes out of the blue. So you really had some challenging times. Maybe we'll take them in order. I think that the condition you found, the ability to access data and make data-driven decisions when you first got to Mesa County, was there was room to improve. But you had to, we talked about it off air, you had to live through, though, the experience and the hard work, because you can't just snap your fingers and turn it on one day and then tomorrow you have everything you've ever wanted from a data perspective. So talk a little bit about what it's like taking a department that was on much older infrastructure, a lot of paper, and systems that just weren't where they needed to be for modern times, and then taking that department through the process of actually getting onto something a lot more modern. What were the challenges, and then what was rewarding about it once you got through it?
Yeah, absolutely. So in between that, my manager at the time had actually left to go to the state. So they promoted me. So I got promoted to be the department manager of the environmental health team, probably like November, December of 2019. And so that's when, again, right, we were really, I mean, our tool that we were using at the time was impossible. I mean, basically all it was a glorified Excel, is really what it could do at that point. We couldn't even post like our inspection records online because there was just no way to do it. We were having to like take notes and then bring our inspection reports back to the office to write them. And to your point, one of the things that doesn't allow is like getting a signature on file from your operator. So we would email it to them. So we had record that they saw it and approved, but it really kind of limited that interaction that when you sit down at the end of an inspection and go through a report and have that kind of conversation when your report wasn't even written at that time. And so talk about, do you close a facility or not? You didn't even know what they scored right now because you didn't have an inspection database that could do that. Never mind repeats and when was the last time you did it and all that kind of good jazz. So it was time that we came into the 21st century. And yeah, working with the state team, we were all about onboard, like trying to just have a harmonized system. There was no point in Mesa County Public Health going onto their own system outside of what the state was already using when so much data has to go back and forth, right? The state wants to see our statistics.
Jeff is watching.
Yeah, and in a good way.
Yes,
but I will say,
oh, they're a great partner.
And he and his team was the only reason that Mesa County got what they did, because we did not have the funds internally to do that. And so at the time, I remember just talking to him and like, we need this. And he's like, we've got money. We'll bring you on. We'll pay for X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, okay. And so when I went and told my director, he's like, do it. He's like, that's not a question. And so that was where our journey led. And I think one of the key pieces too was my manager, who was at Mesa County Public Health. She became kind of the project manager for the rollout of these, the database and things like that. And so she kind of knew our data. So she really helped support through the transfer and getting everything up to speed and doing a lot of that. I think some of the lessons learned, though, there was obviously the training part of it internally, right? It's just not even just training how to use the system, but like I said, we weren't even doing we were taking time going back into the office to write. So now you had to reset your mind of like, I'm going to sit in the lobby of this restaurant and write my report, so just changing the way we did our inspections. And I'm going to have a number now that could potentially say that I have to close this facility, and so like coaching through all of that, I think was a new change for the inspectors in the field. And also billing, I think that's one of the things that you forget about how key that information is, that data that you have about all your facilities in your databases is the bills, right? Like when they have to pay their license every year, making sure that information is up to date, that you have the right contacts. and the complication of keeping corporate versus this versus that, right? I think that was kind of the big part, and it really required several people internally, and then also working with, I mean, at the time it was Health Space, as now, HS GovTech. So definitely being able to, again, that was another really good partnership that was important to have, because we couldn't do it on our own. I mean, that wasn't our focus. We had to do inspections. We had to, we knew what we knew.
Yeah, you
But
have a day job, and an
yeah.
important one at that. It's and
Mhm.
I would say, yeah, Colorado did some really amazing things, and like even if you take the technology out of it, which it was at its heart a part tech transformation, but just the way they supported the locals. Any state out there who is looking to explore models of how other states worked, seriously, look at what Colorado did. They they've got a lot of home rule counties there, so like it's not true to say, well, they could tell them to do whatever they wanted. No, like the counties, a lot of them had choice at the local level. The state put a package together that was a win for them, and I think it's really paying off. Some of the things they're doing with reporting now at the state level, and the data they can look at and drill down on, wouldn't be possible if they hadn't leaned and gone all in supporting, including financially, the locals.
And
And I
I
wish more
think,
states did it.
yeah, absolutely. And I think there was a ripple effect through our environmental health programs. As food was obviously the first inspection system that we got in, but I know we were bringing in our pool inspections, we were bringing in our body art inspections into the system. And so now you can kind of, as an environmental health manager, you can see the breadth of it all, and you're getting out of Excel, because even pools and body art, they were way behind where our food inspections were from a technology standpoint. And so now you're really setting the level field for all of your programs that you manage. So food that's where the money's coming from, but it's also helping support the other programs that are environmental health.
Wow. And so you got promoted, I believe, I don't think I've confused myself, to a supervisor, but
Yeah.
actually at one point there demoted yourself because you
Yeah.
wanted to be in the field doing inspections more. Is that true?
Absolutely. It's something that I actually don't really put on my resume either, but I will share that. Like, yeah, I was promoted. I did it for about a year. Obviously, in that year, COVID hit, and it was a lot. And I just remember being like, I don't want to, this isn't why I came here, right? This isn't why I came to public health. I miss being in the field. I miss talking to my operators. Again, that impact, right? Of like seeing what I can do, how I can do it, and where I can do it. So I demoted myself, and it actually, I think, really worked out. They then went and hired one of the state local assistants. So she was a food program kind of for the state. And so she would travel all over the state and give support to the local jurisdictions. So Mesa County was able to bring her in, which again was awesome for me, because now I learned under somebody that really was a powerhouse in her role too. So I think it ended up being a win-win, and it gave me getting back to what I enjoyed the most and not being afraid to do that, right? I wasn't making a ton of money anyway, so what difference did it make to just devote myself?
Right on. And the one thing, and I think this was happening before the pandemic. I certainly think the pandemic probably accelerated it. One thing we hear a ton about, and even if you go like to the health inspector Reddit community, almost a week doesn't go by without somebody posting and asking for advice or help around the issue of burnout. And it does seem to be getting worse. I don't know if some of it was. I think you had this experience in Grand Junction too, where you already had your plate full with your core regulatory responsibilities. The pandemic hits, and you all, and something you might want to talk about a little bit. You actually did some creative things to open earlier than anybody else in your state, if I recall. But you turned into the mask police, the dine-in capacity police. So many things they couldn't find anybody else to throw it to, and they're like, oh, environmental health, they're already out there on a regular basis, just make them enforce it. Did that contribute to burnout when we on the issue of that? And also, what did that do, you think, to one of the things you've touched on a lot, a good relationship between an operator, industry, regulator? Did that put that to a test and in some way strain it? Because now you're having to do these extraneous things that, strictly speaking, aren't food safety or environmental health related.
Yeah, absolutely. Talking about it, right? It was such an emotional time, I think, for everyone, because, it was chaos, pure chaos, right? But yes, so to our point is, again, very pro-business. Our county commissioners, I know that when Colorado issued their public health order, we have an amusement park out here, kind of a theme park, putt-putt, stuff like that, that refused to close. And the very first thing out of one of our commissioners at the time was, well, this is the state's public health order. They can come out and enforce it themselves. So that set kind of the ground framework for how we were going to execute this response, right? And so we had to get creative. We knew that it was not going to work for us to go in and be the police. We weren't that way anyways. That isn't our culture here. And I don't think it ever will be our culture, right? And I think that's, at the end of the day, you get better compliance when you're not acting like the police, right? When you can build that relationship and set that standard in that culture. So we started getting creative. And we decided that we have our active managerial control incentive program that was already pretty popular. I mean, people were doing it. It was pretty well known. It's called the Blue Ribbon Program. And we would go in, we would do an inspection based on what their food safety policies were. And then we would give them free advertising on our website and say, these are great, Blue Ribbon, these restaurants are going above and beyond. So I remember sitting with my director at the time and being like, well, what if we did something like that? Right? Like we have an inspection-based program and it's incentive-based, right? And because there was a ton of our community members that wanted to know, where can I go dine out safely, right? Like I want to dine out, right? I'm tired of being in the house after 2 weeks. Like I want to go do something. And so we felt like it was our obligation to help support that and give that to the community members. So we mirrored that. We made a checklist. We took the public health order. I made an inspection checklist that was really easy to understand because there was a lot of nuances and complications in the public health order as well, right? It's just like any regulation, it's never easy. And they all changed, right? I mean, public health orders morphed, right, over time.
Yeah, they did.
And we hired a bunch of like temporary employees, trained them up really quickly, and we sent them to all the businesses. And we had a way of like, and everyone got an inspection, right? And you would get the handouts and you would get like the information, but those that were really bought into the program that recognized like, okay, we called it 5-star, if I did this, like I could put something on my door. We still have those stickers. I see them around town still on some restaurant doors and stuff. And you'll get promoted. The website, the Grand Junction Sentinel, all that kind of stuff was going to advertise you. We did that. And so that program actually, we got opened, before anyone in the state. It got actually national recognition. People from Alaska, like the health departments from Alaska were calling, like, how'd you do this? Again, it was a community-wide effort. We had the support of our commissioners. We had the support of our Board of Health. We had the support, of our local business community, right? And it was voluntary. Some businesses didn't want to open. They didn't feel safe, right? You did have your outliers of people who were not going to be compliant and were just blatantly open. And we did what we could there, right? But we definitely didn't want to put ourselves in harm's way because that did happen, right? Like people just got very angry from an operator's perspective, and it wasn't worth like some of that. And I think as a informed community member, right, you could just like a restaurant, you could walk in and right away whether or not you want to eat there. Same kind of thing with the public health order. You knew right away, like, are they following the rules or not? Does this feel safe for me? So that's kind of what we did. It was a really, really good success. And I think to your point, it built that trust back. And I will say there was one success story. So we have this local breakfast restaurant. There's a couple locations here. It's an independent restaurant. And we had a rule internally that 2 people always had to go and inspect this restaurant together because there was just this operator just never cared and sometimes could get very confrontational. COVID comes around and he was one of the ones that actually came down to the health department. And I remember sitting, like, people were like, oh my gosh, he's here. Like, what's happening, right? Because he's got the reputation. And I remember sitting down with him in the lobby, and we went line by line on how he could comply with the public health order and get opened and, be get the recognition for it. And so that was definitely a success story, a silver lining, one success story. But no, we had a ton of them like that. And I do feel like we did the right thing for our community, for our business community. And then also our public. One other fun thing too, real quick, is we have a giant country music festival out here. It's called Country Jam. And it takes place like in the middle of the desert and all this kind of stuff. And it's always just a fun thing to inspect, kind of. But we, again, were one of the first cities in the country to have a large music event. And the CDC actually came out and spent the day with us, like walking around and like seeing what we tried to implement with the vendors and with the, the music venue and all that kind of stuff and the parameters. And then also we tracked our testing and just tried to like trace things back. And, but it was really cool too, as the CDC was like, okay, I mean, I don't know if that was a good thing or not. They're probably like, what the heck is Grand Junction doing? Somebody needs to be on site, but we were open and we were going to do it. Right.
That's awesome. And the CDC, they hopefully they took notes.
Yeah, that's what part of it was to help build out their guidance for like large events, right?
Because and again, this is not even a knock on them or any regulator. I think we judge things from history sometimes through that perfect 2020 vision. There's a lot of fear, and people didn't. We didn't know in the early days of it. Like it became evident pretty quickly. I think like kids didn't seem to get it as badly, but when it first started, we didn't know all that, and so I think we attribute motive in a lot of cases to things that were just fear and chaos based. Now, we won't get into like once you get to 2022 and 2023, we did know a lot more. But in those early days, I think you can understand that they were trying to get it together because it was kind of a bolt out of the blue thing, and no one knew what was up or down. Was COVID and the intensity of that part of the reason you thought, probably also the money too, right? Maybe I'm not going to stay at this particular role forever, because at some point after that you began to look at a transition, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Burnout was real. I was tired of going into a facility and just almost just getting berated every time and questioned and having to share public opinion and, all that kind of stuff. And so, I think I was done. My ship had sailed, and, I lost my joy in doing it. And so I started looking out elsewhere, and I kind of even forgot, but I had applied for Amazon. They had a remote food safety program regulatory role open. 6 months later, I get a call to interview for Amazon, and I go through their process. Their interview process is beyond intense. You do several different rounds. You have to do a writing assessment. You have to answer all these different kind of questions, all that kind of good jazz. Wow. And I get the job, and I'm like, okay, I guess. And it was hard. I think leaving public health and environmental health was probably the hardest decision I made in my career, because like you said, I made such a decision in my path to come to Grand Junction, to take a ginormous pay cut, to demote myself, and now I was leaving. And so that was a really kind of a turning point in my career, and like, what do I really want to do, and how do I want to do it? So what was still in my heart.
You're still a regulator at heart, right? It always will be. And of course, the logo that's behind you, you've kind of gotten back to those roots. But Amazon, what was the role there? Because that's a huge organization, obviously. And they have a lot of different divisions and food and things as well.
Yeah, so we all know, I think grocery business is real in Amazon, and they're putting a lot of money in grocery and delivery of food and all that kind of good stuff. So my original role was kind of a regulatory launch role. So I got to travel all over the country and help launch their grocery stores in all the different jurisdictions. So I came in doing plan reviews, and when construction was getting ready to do kind of their inspections with the regulators, I was on site to make sure that we were all compliant, that our plans looked good, that it was built to code. And then I would help work with the regulators on getting kind of the nuances fixed, right? They wanted this over here. They wanted that light shield, whatever it is, so working through that with the construction team up until we launched the store. So that was my first role at Amazon. That was an incredible role. I learned a lot. I had a lot of autonomy. I got to meet a lot of different regulators, again, still staying close to that world, and had a lot of conversations. And I think it was when I really got to experience how different regulations are across the country, and how hard that is from a corporate standpoint, right? Like one thing here in this city is completely different over here, and so how do you justify that internally? How do you make sure that gets
It's so
implemented?
fragmented, isn't it? Like you have
Mhm.
probably you saw it from step one, plan review. Like those rules differ in every state, all the way through how they view certain violations. What version of the food code are they on? How
Yeah.
bad have they bastardized it?
Yeah. Yeah.
How did that? Was that one of the biggest challenges in that particular role at Amazon? Is just trying to have a coherent national brand, but having to play by 50 plus variations of the rules.
Absolutely. And I think because Amazon is still kind of a baby in the food world, right? They're not this, I mean, they're a big player, but they're still new in that aspect in some ways, that it was not only like assessing what it was externally, right? But then also bringing those regulations back internally and working to harmonize those regulations and working to explain to our construction managers, like, I know, I get it. Your store over here, like 10 miles down the street, you can do this, but over here you have to do this, right? Like, so it was definitely playing that middle person back and forth between. And I think that's where the next two roles in Amazon is I was really responsible for the auditing program. So then I transitioned into a food safety auditing program, worked with Stereotech, who was the partner at the time. Again, relationships are key. Shout out to the Stereotech team. They were incredible. And again, helping train me on our own policies and procedures, right? They were just awesome. And the data there, and working with, Full Circle, bringing back into their health department inspection monitoring system. So kind of the same thing I was doing at Burger King way back when, I got to do again at Amazon. And so that was fun. We, at the time, were working with Hazel Analytics, who now Ecolab has bought out, but another phenomenal team, phenomenal data and just analytics and stuff like that. So it really helped there. And I think that's kind of the ammunition, especially at a company like Amazon, who values data, that you have to kind of prove what you're doing, right? You can't just be like, because someone told me so, right? You have to
Yeah.
prove that justify it.
And that's a
So,
challenge, right? Because not every jurisdiction has a good electronic system. Some have electronic, but it's not a good one. Or maybe
mhm.
it's old and you can't get data out of it good. Just getting the regulatory inspection data when you operate in across the country is not a walk in the park, is it? And you're right. There's people. Ecolab has a good program for it, but it's still a lot of work because it's not all
Yeah.
in one place.
Absolutely. And I think that's where the ones that weren't online, we ended up implementing a ton of internal policies around, like, you have to send it when you get it. And then we added that also to our internal auditing. So Stereotech would go and do their audits and ask the question, like, when's your last inspection report? Do you have it on site? Can you, garnish it? Did you send it and get it uploaded to the system? And so then I would take those answers and kind of make sure and do the follow-ups with the team, and kind of cross kind of collate all that stuff. But yeah, it's still very manual when you're trying to, like, make sense and see trends and out of that data. But I think, again, technology is helping, and there are some companies that are just raising the bar and setting the stage for it. And it will become, I think, eventually it will become just a part of a food safety management system.
It will get there. I think AI is going to help with that. There's
Yeah.
some things that are
Mm-hmm.
going to, I think, help make it a little less insane. But you
Yeah.
actually, like, not only 50 versions within the US, but at Amazon being international, you also got a peek at the need to harmonize internationally, right? And the
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
variances between different countries. We had, in fact, if you haven't seen it, if you're watching this, check it out. There's an episode with the food safety vice presidents from Texas Roadhouse and from Wendy's that we did a couple of months ago. And they were talking about that too. And one of the things that really surprised me is the countries that they said actually had stronger or tougher, however you want to describe it, rules than the U.S. And the Middle East was a region they mentioned, which was surprising to me. What was your experience or observation getting a peek at that when you were at Amazon?
Yeah, absolutely. I would probably echo that same sentiment. I do think the Middle East, their regulations are way different and typically a little bit more strict than ours. My main program that I was working on was food segregation. And so really around pet food and human food. If you think about a warehouse, right? And one of the biggest risks in a warehouse is usually pest control, and pests and pet food is usually kind of like hand in hand. And so we were working on some segregation and moving pet food into its own complete area. So if it spilled or if there was an infestation that came in, right, it would be easy to clean up. You can kind of segregate that off. You didn't impact the food business side of the warehouse. But current US regulations, right, as a business operator, why do I now need to designate all this expensive space in my warehouse, all this racking, change all my technology, my routes of how people are palletizing things and putting them away, when in reality, like all I have to do is make sure pet food is stored below human food and doesn't cause a risk, right? And so we worked, I'd say Brazil, like South America and Latin America, their regulations already require pet food segregation. And so they were kind of our gold star there, and learning how they built their warehouse systems and different things like that, and really got business on board. And so that was my kind of role, is to learn from the different regions throughout the world and try and harmonize them, pick metrics that made sense, and then also like work with those business partners and really trying to build best practices internally.
You've earned yourself a master's the hard way in telling corporate people why they're going to have to spend more money and why they should like it.
And I didn't have a regulator to help me do that, right? Like throughout my career, I was always like, oh, the regulator says we have to, right? And that was the hard part, is there was no regulator telling me we had to do that. So yeah, it was making that business case.
That's amazing. Sure. So, you know, Amazon gets a lot of amazing from a logistics perspective and a data perspective. That company, Whole Foods, is a great supermarket as well. Yeah. A lot of I think the pop culture image of them is brutal place to work, right? Really hard charging, hard driving. And a lot of the people that say that, there's, you know, they probably don't have firsthand experience. Some of these things take on a life of their own. You were there. What was your experience working for Amazon? You know, it sounds like a demanding place, but what's your overall kind of assessment on that overall structure and how they drive their teams?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that you better show up and you better be ready, right? Because there's these different Amazon leadership principles, and they expected you to live by them, right? One of them was like, you know, have backbone and disagree, right? So they expected you to come into meetings, to pick apart people's ideas, to share your insights. And so to your point, like, did that create a culture of this like aggressive kind of, but it was forcing us to get better, right? Like no one, just because my director 4 levels above me had an idea didn't mean I couldn't challenge it. It was actually expected of me to challenge their idea. And so that does create, right? Because then you get some people who just want to challenge for the sake of challenging, and then they become difficult to work with. But from a standpoint, like at the corporate level, I never felt that. I think there was also it was my first remote role. And so I made a big key of like, I'm not going to work past 5 o'clock unless I had, you know, so I really kind of set some of my own boundaries. And you get really good at partnerships again, right? Of like, who can help you? I think the whole point of an Amazon role is to work yourself out of a job, in a way, is to build enough systems and processes that you no longer have to do the work. Right now, you're just overseeing it. And so I think like that was kind of the strategy of how to fight some of that chaos, is like, okay, I just have to keep building systems, keep building processes, and that'll be better.
Interesting. So, actually, I think some people hearing what you just said would say, I wish my organization was a little bit more like that. Like, so there's good in that, right?
Yeah.
Because they're wanting to keep scaling. And did you ever feel that you were working yourself out of a job so that you could be cut, or that it didn't feel like that? It doesn't sound like.
No, it never felt like that. Yeah, definitely not. And especially because, you know, the Andy Jassy and different, you know, high-level executives in Amazon publicly continue to support their food business, right? They've spent a ton of money on it, but I think because they've spent a ton of money on it, they're going to continue to figure it out. So I never felt like the food business was going away at Amazon, at least not when I was there. So I always felt it.
One thing you told me off air is that from a Whole Foods perspective, like the bakeries and things, there were aspects of it that were very, very impressive compared to maybe your just standard issue supermarket. What were some of those differentiators and almost like maybe next level that Amazon has introduced in the operations of their supermarkets?
Yeah, and I think where Whole Foods leads the way is, if you go to Whole Foods, you know that you go for a lot of their prepared foods right in-house. Their bakery selections are incredible. And so to go behind the scenes in that and in their grocery stores, it's operating like a manufacturing facility, right? The size of their equipment is very manufacturing based, their policies, their procedures. You think about like Whole Foods allergen management program and their bakery, it's incredible what they do, right? And the processes that they have in place. You think about making sure that the right products have the right, GMO labeling and organic labeling and all that kind of good stuff that Whole Foods manages in the back of the house at the retail level. And I think that's where the partnership with Amazon is key too, because I think there's the data, right, and the technology to help make those processes more efficient and to be able to capture them holistically. And so I think it's a really great partnership. And, part of my role too was to help harmonize with Whole Foods. And we learned a lot. Whole Foods has been around for a very long time. And so they definitely helped mature some of Amazon's food safety, policies and programs. And then on the flip side, Amazon helped kind of modernize some of their policies and programs. So definitely a great team too. I really enjoyed working through those differences in the culture, right? When you're merging two companies, that's another big time when culture comes into play.
We will put Ashley's contact information, as long as she's okay with it, email into the description. I think a lot of people, if they've stuck with it for this long, are like, wow, she's done a lot. And a lot of questions that people ask, a lot of people would look at some of the broad things you've done as almost like a destination in and of itself. Like some people want to be in dairy, some people maybe in manufacturing or supermarket. Yeah, I don't think we've talked to anyone here in this particular format who's just got that much well-rounding. So if you want to reach out to her, you have questions about the different decisions that she made in the career, she's seen a lot. And then you have now come back more to the regulator type roots, right? I mean, not pure regulator in a health department sense, but as your background there behind you says, you're now with NEHA. And talk about maybe what drove you to NEHA and what you're doing now, which is truly serving nationally across the entire environmental health community in a totally different role than the previous ones where you were frontline hands-on in very specific things.
Yeah, absolutely. So Amazon decided to go back to office. And again, I was hired remote, live in the middle of nowhere, and
Ashley's decided, like, oh, hell no.
Yeah, I said, you know what, I'm not doing that. So I made the decision then to find something else. And again, to your point, I have always come back to the regulatory community. NEHA has always been, as a regulator, as a former, even at the National Restaurant Association, I just knew who NEHA was. And I think that's one of the things of advice is like LinkedIn, as cheesy as it is, like one of my network contacts posted that NEHA was hiring. And so I took a look. I looked at the job. It looked cool. It had a very, retail based focus, but it was very much project management and program management, something that I hadn't necessarily done. Like, I don't have my, PMP or anything, but I've done throughout my career. So I said, sure, why not? Let's try it, right? And thankfully, they took the chance on me. And so now, again, talking about culture, it's really helping NEHA get better and more efficient and more effective at what we do so we can continue to serve our members better, right? We can continue to produce world-class training, but now we can do it faster and maybe at a lower cost, right? So our funders are happier, our members are happier. And so I'm seeing the impact in that way. And that's really rewarding on its own. And I think as I continue to progress throughout this, that's one of the fun things right now with NEHA is you may see me training some classes here shortly, right? You may see me working on some different grant programs or those kind of things. I got a chance to work on the collaborative grant where I was sitting on monthly calls with Glenda Lewis. She writes, like, her and her team write the food code. How fangirl was I, right? And I was getting to talk about how we can get people to adopt the food code. And so all those things, right, it all comes back full circle. And I'm really feeling thankful that NEHA took the opportunity to hire me. And And I do think with all the uncertainty that has happened over the last couple of months, we are seeing maybe the light at the end of the tunnel. And retail food safety, I think, will always be key with the administration and just in this country. And so there's a big world that I think is still ahead of us for sure. So I'm optimistic here.
Really glad that you brought that up, because you all have, NEHA, in my opinion, and he's frequent on the show, and Dr. Dijak, in my opinion, has done more in 10 years for the visibility and trajectory of NEHA than at any other point maybe in their history. The organization has grown, the membership has grown, and you're doing a lot of innovative things, one of which was you're administering those FDA grants. I think a lot of people, especially in the health department world, if they were a part of the voluntary standards grants, probably just maybe wound back 30 seconds to hear what you just said again. You're optimistic.
Yes.
We've gotten through that doge of the day kind of stuff. But when you say that you think that actually food safety is not far from a priority of the administration, you're not just speculating. I mean, you all are meeting with all of your counterparts at the federal level, and you're coming away with the sense that they're going to continue to be supportive, and you don't see it deteriorating in terms of monetary grants to health departments?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, because of this, we've gotten even better financially. So for the RFFM program, the retail flexible funding model, this year when we launched our new cycle, we had more applicants than we ever had in the history of the program. And we figured out a way to fund them somehow, right?
Wow.
Like maybe they didn't get all the money they asked for. Maybe they just got a training grant, but there was money, right? And I think that's what we are trying to do. And we've got a really brilliant team behind the scenes, as the administrator of the grant, and working, very closely with our project officer for this program. And just everybody is supportive. Everybody believes in this program. We have the data that shows the program works, right? And so we're just figuring out to meet the goals on bringing new people in and keeping those in the program, making progression on the standards. And so, yeah, I can take a sigh of relief. I think a lot of people can in the retail food safety world. Is just the money, it'll come, right? We just got to kind of continue to give the metrics back, give the data back, right? We go beyond, this is beyond data management. We've heard that from our FDA partners of the more data we can give them, the more they can inform their leadership in their role, right? As continuing to remind them of the importance of food safety.
It's really great news.
Telling that story.
Unexpected to some people. And of course you can understand why some people from headlines can't make heads or tails anymore of what's actually going on when the rubber meets the road. Is there anything that you're working on or is being contemplated in NEHA that you can mention at this point that you're excited about, or anything that you guys are involved in right now that you want to go out of your way to remind everybody that it's out there or what you're working on?
Yeah, I think there's one that comes to mind is we have the retail standard assessment tool. And so this currently exists for those grantees or anyone who's working on the standards. And it's just a way to, once you audit yourself in the standards, the FDA has built out an Excel template of, okay, I have a gap. How do I fix that gap? How do I mitigate that gap? It's a project management plan. We have now digitized it and are making it into this tool, this app, right? That we can now have, you can easily go in, do your self-assessment. You can put in a project plan. You can assign people tasks. You can see what your tasks are coming up and do. I mean, it's a whole new way of getting to modernize the foundation and the framework that the FDA has laid for us. So that I'm really excited.
Has the app been released yet?
Not yet. We are almost ready to beta test with a couple of our jurisdictions and our couple of key players in the RFFM program. So we are getting ready to beta test probably in the next couple of weeks. And then we are hoping to get it rolled out probably by end of year, maybe even sooner, right? And once those tweaks come back, and it'll be awesome. And I think it'll just really help, again, from a data perspective, be able to tell the story of the retail standard program in a different way. In a way that we've never been able to say before. So, from
what I've seen, I spent some time with Dr. Dijak about it, and we talked to Evan a bit about it too, from Denver. It's really good, and if once you guys get the tweak round done and get it out, if you would like, we'd love to have y'all come in and put the Dog and Pony show on and get more and more people using it, because it's going to be a great resource. And anything you can graduate to, like an app or something, I think is going to get a much better uptake rate, just because that's how people are used to doing things now. So definitely keep us posted, and I think that people are going to be really excited when that gets released into production. So Tina asked a question of you the other day I thought was interesting, especially in light of the breadth of your resume and different focus areas. If you could tell your younger self something, so maybe pre-Burger King internship days, in light of everything you've done and that you know now, what would you tell? And another way of saying that is, we're doing an episode here soon with one of the NEHA interns, just such bright kids in that program. And what would you tell them as they're looking to embark into this field?
Yeah. Personally, I would have said, like, everything's going to work out okay, right? Stop worrying and just, do what you need to do. But I think from a professional standpoint, it's definitely like, don't be afraid. Go back to that fear part, right? And I think that sometimes, like, you don't want to ask the question, or you don't want to say, well, can I go to this meeting? Or sure, I'll take on this project, right? I think it's just do that. Just do it. Throw yourself wholly into it, and not be afraid to make the mistakes and screw up. How many times I have screwed up a lot, like big mistakes, but again, I was making decisions with the right intention, right? And but insane what I have done in my career from a mistake standpoint. But I think, it's really about just keep going and keep saying yes, and just roll up your sleeves and build the relationships. I think that's part of it. No matter how good you are, no matter how technical you are, if you don't have those relationships, you don't have those people in your corner, you're not going to be able to pursue the career, get what you wanted out of your career. I think that's key. And that's something AI and all that kind of stuff will never replace, right? They may replace their ability to answer a question about food safety. It's probably already better than what I can give you, but how I can give it to you and make you feel about it, that's the part, and the relationship that I have with you is, I think, the key piece.
Yeah,
so
that's 1,000% true. And I love every part of that answer. I think there's a universal life lesson in some of what you just said. Be bold, right? I used to have a little plaque on my desk. I don't know where it went, lost in a move or something, but it's good things come to those who wait, but only the things left by those who hustle. And their boldness matters, right? Especially when you're working in organizations that are chronically short-staffed, right? Like, it's actually I love what you said. Don't have fear, because the other thing I think that people fear is that if I haven't made a couple mistakes before lunch, it's a good day, and it's so But I think people have this entrenched thought pattern that a mistake means that they were careless. And I wish people would divorce those things, that carelessness does not have to exist for a mistake to happen, right? And also, especially in this line of work, and you're inspecting, you can't see the future. You're making a judgment call based on the best information in front of you today. You're going to walk out of that facility and you don't know what's going to happen next. So by definition, if you're a fearful, apprehensive type, you got to get over that, or this is a tough job.
Absolutely. Yeah. Being able to make a decision and just feel confident in that decision and go. That bias for action, we talked about that. Just go, just make it, and you'll figure it out along the way.
You will. And as you said earlier, one of the things that felt so good, and it does, doesn't it? Just as a personal thing, when people start asking, what's your opinion? What do you think about this? And the only way to earn that respect and get to that point is the trial and error. Get on the battlefield, make the mistakes, and eventually people are going to seek the answers from you. Just so many nuggets and everything you just said. Before we let you go, and I know we kept you longer than we had scheduled you for, but you've been an inspector. Your heart's in regulation. Any stories from the field? It's always one of the most popular parts. We usually even clip those out as a separate short segment, and those get so many interactions and views. What comes to your mind if I say the most memorable, craziest, however you want to label it, from your time in the field as an inspector?
Yeah, I think we can all talk about our roach stories. I mean, that's pretty common for everybody. And so I will have to say the time that I shrieked, like let out a shriek on an inspection one time. So there's a local market here in Grand Junction, and they do custom meat processing. And they also are a retail facility, so they make their own beef jerky in-house, right? So I was going down, I was inspecting the jerky, the HACCP part of their jerky making process, and you have to walk down these like old rickety basement, stairs, and you're going down, you're looking at their dryers, and it's like kind of, it's creepy. The operator's not with me, who knows where they are, right? And I turned this corner, and there is a deer that is hanging,
Oh,
and it just like a dead deer, right? It hadn't been skinned yet, and I just was like, and I was so, thank goodness nobody was with me, and I was so embarrassed. But then you're thinking okay, they're like processing this animal, and here's their jerky processing, and so then you go into full food safety geek risk, all that kind of stuff, right? But that was probably one of the most unique experiences I had. And we definitely helped them build some more physical barriers in between their custom meat processing, where they're hanging the deer and where they are processing their jerky.
If blood spatter is a risk, you probably need to make some changes.
Yeah.
It's not
Definitely.
CSI. That is awesome. Well, Ashley, this has been, I know now why people are like, you got to get her on. And so thank you to the people who have asked for that. And I get it. Ashley, I really appreciate you joining us.
It's been fun.
It has been. And just congrats on a really full career to date, and look forward to seeing what you do with it next. If history is any indication, you're far from done. I think you get bored. You get bored easily, don't you?
Maybe.
That's a good thing, though. It's also a sign of intelligence. So, but this was a lot of fun. And anytime, like with the app and things, anytime you got something you want to talk about, let us know. Come back. We'd love to have you anytime.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you all.
Thank you. That was Ashley Miller, the now with NEHA. Fascinating story. Senior program coordinator, if I get the words out there, and project manager at NEHA. Fascinating conversation. Hopefully you enjoyed it as much as I just enjoyed having it. For all of us here at the Beyond Data Management podcast, powered by HS GovTech, I'm your host, Cameron Garrison. Thank you so much for joining us for the past hour and change, and we'll see you again next week. Same time, same channel. Thanks so much.